Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about Alabama and Notre Dame making some pretty big time statements this past weekend. Now, you can take it kind of as you want, especially with that Alabama game with a couple of injuries on the other side. You can take it as you please. But I do think it was a huge confidence booster for the Tide as they head into a bye before what could be just a season definer against LSU in a couple of weeks. But let's get into a couple upset alerts around the country because there were quite a few that got a little bit sketchy towards the end of their game, and they were able to pull it out. Really, all of these teams were able to pull it out, but it got close there for a second. And we'll start with that Ohio State game because this one got weird in a hurry. It felt like early on in that second quarter, early on or late in that second quarter, oh, excuse me, it felt like Ohio State was going to be able to pull away. It felt like they were going to be able to make the explosive plays downfield. Felt like they had the guys to just get it done, not necessarily have to worry too much. Their defense was going to be able to handle business, and frankly, their defense did handle business. They played really good football pretty much from start to finish in this one. Had a couple of lapses that weren't taken advantage of, which was another huge reason that Nebraska was not able to win this one, which is just a story as old as time around Nebraska. But I have a much rosier look on the season for Nebraska going forward, but I'll talk about that here in a second. For Ohio State, I think a lot of the same worries that you had last year offensively still sit there. I think when you talk about this team, if they're not able to run the football, they're not going to be successful at all. And in the past, when you had a guy like C.J. Stroud, when you had a guy like Dwayne Haskins, or you had a guy like Justin Fields, you knew teams had to respect it. You knew teams had to say, okay, we know this guy can tear us to pieces. If we're not careful on the back end of this defense, we have to be able to at least sit a couple of guys back in coverage. With Will Howard, they're not nearly as scared. And that's why you see some of the guys running deep over the middle of the field. You see a Jeremiah Smith just get lost for a defense. It's because they're worried much more about the run than the pass, and with that, big plays are going to come. And Ohio State took advantage of some of those big plays in this game. That being said, he can't just make all of the plays. Will Howard is not going to be a guy that is ever going to be in a position where you have no run game going, but he goes for 400 yards, 5 touchdowns, and wins you a game outright. That is not the quarterback that he is. That's not the quarterback that you brought him in to be. You have to be able to run the football. If Ohio State cannot run the football, maybe more than really anyone else in the country, weirdly enough, they're not going to be able to be successful. They have two of the best running backs in the entire country in Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. Losing Josh Simmons on the left side of that offensive line obviously is a huge effect on this team, but you got to figure it out. Every single team in the country has some type of injury on some part of their offense that is hugely important. Everyone's got to deal with this. You are a team that your big time thing was we are as deep a team in the country, we are as talented of a roster in the country. This is the time to prove it. This is the time to prove that you have that depth, that you have all of the guys that you need to go on and finish out this season, go win a Big Ten title, and move on and continue on your way. Now, you're going into a game against Penn State this upcoming weekend where you play that level of football, you're getting beat by 20 points, and this entire season blows up in flames. That's just the reality. There's no way you're beating a Penn State team if you're running 2.1 yards per carry. Just not going to happen. So there's so many things that you're going to have to fix up. There's so many things that you're going to have to figure out. And any Ohio State fan that thinks they're just going to outright win games by throwing the ball with Will Howard, you're in for a rude awakening. I'm just going to be totally honest because this is going to get ugly in a hurry if that's the way you're going to go forward. So they got away with one. It was absolutely huge that they did because Nebraska had chances to win this game and they left them on the table. But at the end of the day, Ohio State lives to fight another day. They go into one next week where if they play this level of football, they are going to be maybe even out of the CFP race, but that's a total conversation for another day. But at the end of the day, a huge a huge one to just get away from with a win. That was kind of the biggest thing to take away from this is Ohio State, you scored more points than the opponent. And at the end of the day, that's all you can ask for with a performance that gross on offense. So you'll take it, you'll move forward. If you don't play better football on Saturday, your season goes up in flames, and maybe Ryan Day's future at Ohio State goes up in flames. But for Nebraska, I think this was a huge win a huge game for this program. Shouldn't say win. Hate to give them that, but at the end of the day, a huge game for this program. Matt Rule talked about it right after the game. He said it felt like they were seeing some of the things that they had been preaching for quite some time around there, and it really felt like that. It felt like a team that, I'll be totally honest, early on, or in the second half, going into halftime, really, I was sitting there saying, okay, Nebraska's held tough. I've seen this a movie before. They fight for a half, they fight for a little bit, and then Ohio State's able to pull away. That did not happen. And I think it was a lot of just Nebraska being the tougher team in a lot of different ways. And that's another issue with Ohio State that has been following them for quite some time. But they got to play better. They have to be able to win that game next week, because technically you don't need to win it to get to the CFP. But let's be totally honest. If Ryan Day wants a job in Columbus, Ohio next year, he badly needs to win that game. He badly needs to win the rest of the games on that schedule, or things are going to get ugly in a hurry. So Ohio State gets the win. That's all you can take away from this game. They get the win. Nebraska, I think you proved a lot in that game, and you can continue moving forward feeling good about what you are. And Ohio State, you live to fight another day. And now you got to regroup, play much better football next week, or this thing's going to get away from you in a hurry. Another top 5 team that played a game that, weirdly enough, this was one that could have been comfortable for Texas. They absolutely could have pulled away in this game and taken care of business, but they really tried to lose this game every which way from Tuesday. They did just about everything in their power to find a way to lose this game, because every time they got something going offensively, it was the O-line making a bad mistake in pass coverage, or missed assignments, or holding, or whatever it was. Or they got a pick 6 late in this game that would have buried it and made it look a lot better. And then Vernon Broughton gets a targeting call. So it's just things that are fully in Texas' control, that they're finding a way to get teams back in games. And Vanderbilt played good football. I'm not necessarily taking anything away from what Vanderbilt did, because they fought their tails off. And the fact that they are not a top 25 team in Missouri is right now is absolutely insane. But at the end of the day, a really, really impressive team, and it's one of those things that whenever you face Vanderbilt, it's going to be tough. I think Texas made it a little bit tougher on themselves than they had to. So a lot of those things can be fixed in the bye week that's coming up for them. So hopefully that's something that they can do for their sake as they move forward the rest of the way. But as of right now, I think you look back at that game, you see that Quinn Ewers had 2 picks. Neither of those picks were on him. Both were blocking assignment issues. One, obviously the second one looks a little bit worse on him. The reality is, a free rusher, if he makes that play, he makes that play. That tip can go any number of directions. It just happened to go into another Vandy player's arm. So there's plenty of reasons to worry about Quinn Ewers going forward. The performance yesterday is not one of them. I can promise you that. He played really good football, and those 2 mistakes were very far from his fault. I can promise you that. But at the end of the day, you come away with a win, a very gross win, and you come away with another win because your defense just is able to gut it out. They were handed so many short fields the same way they were against Georgia, and they were able to handle it the same way they were against Georgia. They forced 3 turnovers on an offense that I believe Diego Pavia only had 1 turnover going into this game. So really, really good stuff from that side of the ball. It's hard to be remotely angry at the Texas defense after this one, because they played incredible, flew all around the field, played very aggressively. These defenders on Texas absolutely have steam coming out of their ears when they play football, because they fly downhill and they really hit you. But at the end of the day, Vandy deserves a ton of respect here. It was one of those games that very easily could have gotten away from them, and they didn't allow it to. Texas obviously gave them a couple of chances, but Vandy took them and ran with them, and Texas didn't take advantage of a lot of I believe they had 0 points off turnovers. So gives you an idea of just how much of a difference there was in just opportunistic football. And Texas missed the mark a lot on the offensive side of the ball, and a little bit of an issue is forming around that offense, because you don't have an offensive line that is going to be blocking consistently. That quick pass game becomes a little bit more important, and then the quick pass game turns into possible picks because guys can read those and jump those routes. So a lot of things to figure out. If Texas cannot get that play action offense where they're throwing the ball 15, 20 yards downfield going, they're not going to be a team that's going to make the CFP. I feel pretty good about that, because there's going to be a couple of teams that are just going to take that away and say, beat us underneath, and they haven't been able to do that, at least consistently, with these elite teams. So it's going to be something to watch going forward. I think they'll be more than fine, but there's definitely some things that are not necessarily super readily fixable. You'll have to figure it out during the bye week, and then you got Florida coming out of it. We'll see what happens there. For Vandy, a little bit of a tough finish, no doubt about that for this team. When you have LSU and Tennessee still on the docket, it's going to be tough. I think 7 wins would be great. 8 wins would be absolutely remarkable. Regardless, this has been a huge season for Vanderbilt and should set themselves up for really a great amount of success going forward. For Texas, you got away with one, and your bye comes at the very perfect time, and you can move forward feeling at least okay, but this one was ugly. No doubt about that, and you're going to have to be able to figure out some of those things that can be figured out in the bye week, but if they're not, then you come out of the bye week against a Florida team that playing some pretty good football. Got to be very careful. But overall, you get the win, you keep moving forward, you keep that hope alive, and stay near the top of the SEC. And then we'll move over to the Big 12 because Kansas State escaped. Frankly, I don't know how this happened because you look at the box score in a number of different ways. It is hard to find a way that Kansas was able to stick in this game. Kansas State had 229 on the ground, 253 through the air. It should have been a blowout win. It was exactly the way that you probably would have drawn it up if you were going to get a blowout win, but the safety was a difference. It was the difference here, which is absolutely insane, but at the end of the day, they were able to get the win here, and it's kind of an encapsulation of Kansas' season just overall. Had plenty of chances to go out and win this game, had plenty of chances, the ability to win it, and then you come up short because of self-inflicted wounds. It's just the way that this season has gone for Kansas, and it's one of those things that's probably going to haunt them for quite some time because you look forward at the rest of the schedule, 3 wins is very much on the table for this Kansas team. A year after you felt very good about the future of your program, you're now questioning a lot. You hate to see it. It was one of those games that we talked about last week, could have been kind of a one-game season salvager. It was not that by any means. It went the opposite direction for Kansas. But overall, for Kansas State, you survive. It was tough. And we've talked about this before on here. There are going to be Big 12 moments, especially in this last month as we get into a lot of the craziness. There's going to be some Big 12 moments out there. There's going to be some games where you have no business losing, you're favored by double digits, and a team just finds a way to beat you. Avoiding those is the number one goal, and Kansas State was able to avoid one on Saturday. That's the end goal. You're able to get out with a win, but for Kansas, a tough season gets tougher. You got Iowa State and BYU coming out the next 2 weeks, so I don't think it's going to get all that pretty. It's going to be a very, very ugly finish to the season, and Kansas, I still think, has a great head coach. I still think can move forward from this, but a lot of resetting to do in this offseason, no doubt about that. For Kansas State, you're in a great spot moving forward. You have Houston, then you have a bye, then Arizona State, another bottom feeder in that conference. You got Cincinnati, and then a huge one at the end of the year in Ames, Iowa for that possibly a spot in the Big 12 championship and maybe even a spot in the CFP. So it's going to be remarkable to watch the rest of the season unfold for Kansas State, but you escaped with one, no doubt about that, and you were able to at least get a win and move forward and stay in the craziness that is the Big 12. And then we got SMU. This is the weirdest one of the bunch. There were a lot of games that I just talked about that I have no earthly idea how one team was able to win or how one team was able to keep it close. I know how Duke was able to keep it close. I have no earthly idea how they weren't able to win this game. SMU lost the turnover battle not 2-0, not 3-0, 6-0 in this game. They gave the ball away 6 times to Duke, and Duke scored 27 points in the entire game. It's absolutely remarkable. It's almost a Herculean feat to find a way to take the ball away 6 times and only score 27 points and lose in overtime. And they lost because they had a field goal blocked at the end of the very end of regulation. Just terrible. It's one of those games that Duke's going to look back on. Every single player on that team is going to look back on for years to come, just saying, how? How did that possibly happen? How did we let that game slip away? Because the reality was you probably could have kicked field goals on all of those picks. You're probably winning pretty comfortably by probably double-digit points in this game, but you couldn't get it done. And SMU wins in overtime. Somehow they win in overtime. But for SMU, without R.J. Maryland, this offense is just different. They don't necessarily have the guy that they feel confident going to. They were able to hit a couple of big-time plays to Robert Daniels that made all the difference in the world, but as of right now, they do not have a very good pass game, and it's something that they're badly going to need to figure out. They got to find that another number one guy because R.J. Maryland was huge for that offense, and losing him was very, very glaringly obvious. And then for Duke was in a position where they found a way to lose this game. And I think there were a number of different things that could have gone wrong or could have gone right for them in the last little bit, because you look at the final couple of drives from SMU, it went INT, fumble to finish regulation. That was the way that they finished, and they find a way to escape. They find a way to block a field goal, get to overtime, knock down a 2-point conversion, and that was about it. It was absolutely insane, and now he set up a huge matchup against Pitt next week. It's one of those matchups that absolutely will define what the ACC is going forward, and very well could send one of those teams to the CFP and one of those teams home. It'll be incredible to watch that one unfold, but for Duke, you're going to want this one back. You had 2 missed field goals. You had 2 turnovers on downs. It's really tough stuff all the way around. But a win at Miami would totally flush that away. So maybe you can get back on the horse, but this one's tough. For SMU, you keep your season alive, and that's the most important thing. You have a huge one this upcoming weekend with Pitt at home, and then you got BC, Virginia, and Cal to finish the season. You win that Pitt game, it's going to be hard to not see them possibly making a CFP run. So a lot on the table for SMU still, even though this was one of the more ugly performances they had all year. They very badly need to figure out that pass game without RJ Maryland. For Texas, you got to figure out that pass game just in general. That offensive line needs to play a whole lot better. Quinn Ewers needs to be a little bit better at identifying rushes and getting guys where they need to be. Just little things that absolutely can be fixed in the bye week, and they could come out, dominate Florida, and be right back where they need to be. But as of right now, some holes can be poked in those teams that didn't feel like they could be a couple of weeks ago. So definitely something to watch as we head on the rest of the season, as we get into the home stretch that is November. Going to be a nightmare to deal with. But at the end of the day, let's take our third break here. And when we come back, we just got to talk about all the other ranked matchups. Oregon really planting their flag as the number 1 team in the country. Penn State getting a really weird and gritty win over Wisconsin that earned a lot of respect from me at the very least, and a ton more that we'll talk about right after this.